Thanks so much for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham. The conflict between Hamas and Israel has entered a new and potentially more dangerous phase. Hamas terrorists are hammering Israeli cities with dozens of rockets after rejecting a ceasefire. One of their rockets killed an Israeli civilian today, and Israel has resumed its airstrikes on Gaza, firing missiles at the homes of 4 senior Hamas leaders. Israel is trying to avoid civilian casualties, warning thousands of residents near the Gaza-Israel border to leave their homes as more airstrikes loom. The U.S. is backing Israel's right to defend its citizens.
As we have said many times, the firing of rockets from Gaza at innocent civilians in Israel is completely unacceptable. And Israel and Israel's leaders are certainly entitled to take the kinds of actions that are necessary to keep their citizens safe.
And joining us now with more from Jerusalem is our Middle East Bureau Chief, Chris Mitchell. Chris, what's the latest on the ground there?
Well, you know, Ephraim, 24 hours ago, they were talking about a ceasefire. We were down on the border earlier today, saw a number of rockets that had been fired and then intercepted by the Iron Dome. So day 9 is back to where it started. A lot of rockets coming out of Gaza and then followed by the airstrikes into Gaza. As Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, if there's no ceasefire, then they will fire. And I think they're intensifying the campaign right now with the possibility of a ground invasion sometime in the near future.
Wow, so there is a likelihood, you think, of a ground operation at this point?
Yeah, we were down there this morning, like I said, and we saw dozens of tanks that had been, amassing on the border. And all along the border, there's troops and equipment, tanks getting ready for a possible ground invasion. A lot of people think, and some military experts think, that really a ground invasion is the only way they're going to be able to stop these rockets. There's been about more than 1,500 airstrikes by Israel right now, and still Hamas is able to fire dozens of rockets each and every day. So it might be boots on the ground that are going to have to go in there, but it has a lot of risks. I mean, there's house-to-house fighting. This is the kind of urban warfare that is very dangerous. There could be casualties on both sides, and so it carries a lot of risk if they do go in.
Of course, the world watching and wanting to know, what is the possibility of another ceasefire attempt?
Well, that is a possibility as well. Benjamin Netanyahu sort of left the door open for that in some of his comments yesterday. So that is a possibility. There's a lot of diplomatic activity going on. Egypt is sort of the main mediator right now between Hamas and Israel. The U.S. is involved. The German foreign minister was here just the other day. Tony Blair met with the president of Egypt. So a lot of diplomatic activity going on behind the scenes to try to stop this conflict. But I think the sentiment here in Israel is kind of two things. We were down in Sderot, right on the border today, and the sentiment there is that 99% of the people want this to stop, and I think a ground invasion is the only way to do that, and which would prolong the conflict. But we'll see what happens, either a ceasefire diplomatically or perhaps an extended ground invasion into Gaza.
Chris, could you explain the difference between the way Israel and Hamas are fighting this war when it comes to civilians?
Well, it's diametrically opposed. What Hamas is doing is firing its rockets out of civilian areas, putting their own civilians in harm's way, while Israel is doing everything it can to protect their own civilians, as well as protecting the civilians inside Gaza. They drop leaflets, they text people, they call people on the phones. If they're going to make a strike, they ask them to leave the area and get out of harm's way. There were thousands of leaflets that were dropped this morning informing people in a certain area to get out of there because there was going to be military action going in there. So Israel does what it can to protect their own civilians as well as the civilians in Gaza, and Hamas is fighting within civilian areas that puts their own people at risk. Unfortunately, I think almost 200 people now have died within Gaza, but Israel says it's really the fault and the responsibility of Hamas because they're putting those people in harm's way.
All right, Chris Mitchell in Jerusalem, thank you so much for your insight.
Thanks you.
3 members of an imprisoned pastor's family have arrived safely in the United States following their escape from a campaign of harassment in China. A Christian rights group is reporting that Zhang Xiaoji's daughter, son-in-law, and 1-year-old grandchild landed in Dallas Monday with the help of an underground network of activists. Earlier this month, Zhang Xiaoji was sentenced to 12 years in prison on charges of fraud and gathering crowds to disturb public order. His church is sanctioned by China's government, but it has been involved in a dispute over land for a new building. The Senate held a hearing Tuesday on what some pro-lifers call the most radical pro-abortion bill ever considered by Congress. And as Paul Strand reports from Capitol Hill, bill sponsors say they're trying to undo a rash of state laws meant to restrict abortion. But opponents warn it is a serious attack on states' rights and makes the so-called right to an abortion almost sacred.
The Senate is now considering a bill that many pro-life groups warn would gut almost every meaningful restriction on abortion.
The bill being advanced today would literally overturn hundreds of pro-life, pro-women laws across the country. We're talking laws to end sex selection abortion, third trimester abortions, abortion on babies that are more than 5 months old and capable of feeling pain. This is an extreme bill.
Why would Democrat lawmakers push such a bill in a country that polls suggest is becoming increasingly pro-life?
Well, it might be that they're looking to the November 2014 elections and the fact that they might well lose control of the Senate. So they could see this as a last do-or-die chance to pass any serious liberal legislation.
And co-sponsors of this bill say it's needed to counteract what they label underhanded laws, supposedly meant to protect women's health, but actually aimed at curbing abortions. In just the last 3 years,
states across this country have enacted a total of 205 provisions that restrict women's access to safe abortion services.
These obstacles have put many women in desperate circumstances, some of which may very well endanger their lives. We need laws that put women's health and safety first, not politics.
200 of these underhanded laws have been passed, and it is not right that women should have to go to court year after year after year to get the medical services that the Constitution guarantees them.
But some testifying at this hearing said the bill is actually an unconstitutional attack on the states.
Essentially, this law guts states' rights with respect to abortion. It creates abortion as a special protected class of procedure and abortion providers as a special protected class of providers.
And Representative Marsha Blackburn warned Democrats they're risking the wrath of voters by appearing so enamored of abortion rights.
Many of your constituents perceive that this body is out of touch with the consensus opinion in this country. Public opinion polls show time and again that the American people support limits on abortion.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
Heavy rain is causing flash flooding across the country. A thunderstorm dumped rain and hail in Idaho, flooding some areas with up to 6 feet of water. Students at Brigham Young University are seen here singing as they help with the cleanup efforts. And in Ohio, a car with a family inside hydroplane hit a pole, then fell into a ditch and washed away.
He was screaming that his wife drowned, and she was screaming the same thing over there. My husband and baby drowned, so pretty happy reunion when we got them both together.
In Pennsylvania, firefighters rescued a 12-year-old girl after a drain pipe swept her away for nearly a half mile. Cleanup also started in Maine this morning after 40-mile-an-hour winds uprooted trees. Rain and hail washed out roads and flooded basements with water and sewage. People are urged to stay out of standing water because it could be contaminated. The amount of Antarctic sea ice has reached an all-time high. That report from the National Snow and Ice Data Center is confounding climate change computer models. They say the amount of ice there should be declining, not increasing. The ice around the southern continent covers about 800,000 square miles than normal for this time of year. The London Daily Mail says that means an area the size of Greenland, which would normally be open water, is now frozen. A drilling technology called fracking is sparking intense debate around the country. Supporters say the economic benefits are huge, while opponents argue it contaminates water supplies and air quality. Last night, a city council in North Texas decided it couldn't decide on the issue and will instead put it on the November ballot. Heather Sells has the latest.
The city of Denton, Texas is split over whether fracking helps or hurts the community. Denton sits on a large natural gas reserve, and fracking releases its trapped oil and gas by blasting water, sand, and chemicals deep into underground rock.
Fracking has made major improvements in the U.S. economy.
Believe it or not, the world's biggest oil producer right now is not Saudi Arabia or any other Middle Eastern country. It's the U.S., and fracking is a key reason.
This is not a boom that's going to fizzle in 3 or 4 or 5 years. This is going to be a long time, a 30-year boom.
Fracking is also why North Dakota's economy is booming. Oil production in the state has zoomed up 600% in the last 7 years. That puts North Dakota right behind Texas as the second largest oil-producing state. Such economic benefits are significant, but those who oppose fracking say the environmental and health concerns cannot be ignored. During 8 hours of testimony in Denton Tuesday night, people like Maylee Bush explained what can happen.
Since the fracking started, my children have had headaches, coughing, and nosebleeds.
Voters in Denton will now decide whether or not they'll allow fracking on new wells. And if they vote against the drilling technology, they'll become the first city in this top oil and gas producing state to say no. That's why what happens in Denton is considered a litmus test on the future of fracking. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Kentucky is now licensing counseling pastors to help people with marital conflicts, addictions, and depression. The new law will cover about 30 pastors who work as mental and behavioral health counselors and will allow their services to be covered by insurance. The pastors must have a master's in counseling, more than 1,300 hours of supervised practice, 250 hours of clinicals, and pass a written exam. Kentucky is the 6th state to license pastors, along with Arkansas, Maine, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Tennessee. Up next, outrage brewing. Why ordinary people in towns across the country are worried about the flood of immigrants at the border. Democrats in tough re-election races do not want to be seen with President Obama. The Hill reports Democratic campaign advisors are telling candidates to avoid being photographed with him so Republicans cannot use those pictures in their own campaign ads. And some Democrats are talking about their unhappiness with the president's policies, including his failure to visit the border in the current immigration crisis. One advisor who works for a senator who's up for re-election tells The Hill it's a no-brainer. The second term has been a bit of a disaster. His approval ratings are the lowest of his presidency, and Washington is in disarray. Gallup has the president's approval rating at a low 43% and his disapproval rating at 52%. The paper points out if Republicans retake control of the Senate, it will be seen as a repudiation of the president and his agenda. The Mexican government announced new efforts to cut the flow of migrants coming through its southern border on their way to the U.S. The initiative will strengthen actions against crime and the exchange of intelligence with neighboring countries. It will also improve migrant safe houses along the Mexican southern border, including spaces for unaccompanied minors. More than 57,000 unaccompanied Central American children have arrived in the U.S. since October. A small town outside of Detroit has become ground zero for illegal immigration protests. Citizens from across the state have gathered in Vassar, Michigan, after the city hall announced plans to foster more than 100 undocumented children. And a debate is brewing over that decision.
The most important thing is that we think about what these kids need and do our best as a society to take care of them.
They should have to go through the same process for security reasons that the legal people do when they come here.
Our law says you must come to our country legally. I love these people and I have compassion for them, but we do not need them here taking our services.
Wolverine Human Services, the group that wants to take the children, held a town meeting to try to calm nerves on that topic. Well, coming up, how bad is our border crisis? You'll find out when you see what happened when our cameras were rolling. And we're telling you right now, you just may not believe it. Their story has captivated the country, the thousands of children who have crossed the border in the United States from Central America. But who are they, and why did they come here? Heather Sells traveled to the border of the U.S. and Mexico and brings us this up-close and personal look at this incredible flood of immigrants.
It almost looks like a daycare center, but this is the McAllen Border Patrol Station, just across the Rio Grande from Reynosa, Mexico. The scene is repeated up and down the river valley. Thousands of children, mainly from Central America, packing out stations intended to serve just a small amount of people at a time.
This story, of course, is playing out 24/7 here on the border. As we were shooting footage here along the river, we witnessed a young man being escorted across the Rio Grande River and then moments later surrendering to Border Patrol.
The agent said nothing to us as our camera rolled, seemingly too busy with what has become a crushing workload. To find out why so many kids are coming over now, we traveled across the border to a Christian shelter in Reynosa, Mexico. Many immigrants rest here, then decide whether or not to cross. We met 15-year-old Brian, who says he traveled alone some 1,500 miles from Honduras to find work in the U.S. and provide a better life for his mom back home.
Before leaving Honduras, I fasted a lot. I told God, "Help me, Lord. I want to help my family get ahead in life."
Brian also explained a dream he had that motivated him to go.
People would tell me, if immigration catches you, they will help you a lot.
As our bilingual producer Myra Alejandra spoke with Brian and others, a clearer picture emerged beyond the usual immigration talking points coming out of Washington. First, the journey from the three main sending countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, is incredibly expensive. Smugglers often charge families $4,000 per child. And the trek is dangerous, with Mexican drug cartels quick to assault, kill, or traffic vulnerable children and women. Some, like 15-year-old Wilmer, travel alone and hop trains to try and cross quickly.
One of the hardest parts of my trip was riding the train, enduring the cold rain and running the risk of falling off.
We also learned that a so-called perfect storm of events has led thousands of families to choose now to send their children across the border. We met Maribel in the Guatemalan consulate in McAllen. She was attempting to pick up her friend's detained children after receiving a call from Border Patrol. She said the parents recently paid a smuggler after hearing that Border Patrol would release kids to their parents in the U.S.
And the parents decided okay, this is the time, because everybody thinks it's easy.
The head of the Honduran consulate in McAllen says many parents have believed the same rumor.
It's believed that the parents who are living in the U.S. have been misinformed about some sort of amnesty that the U.S. government would be providing the minors with.
Those kind of statements provide ammunition to the president's critics, and it's why possible presidential contender, Texas Governor Rick Perry, says Obama's immigration policies have failed. Liberals quickly point to escalating violence in Central America as a root cause for the surge, and that too, we found, was a common motivation. At a Catholic shelter in McAllen, Lillian, a young single Honduran mom, told us that the gangs and violence ruled life in her city.
I had a temporary job. I would get out at 8 p.m. and I could not go into my neighborhood because they would kill me.
That leads to one subject both sides can agree on. These immigrants have suffered greatly for the chance to live in America. That pain is also leaving a mark on the local church volunteers who hear their stories. Jeanette Alanius washes bedding for a shelter and spoke with one young mom who was abandoned by smugglers before they reached the border.
She was dropped off, no food, maybe water once in a while. She was able to nurse her baby during that period of time, but the baby was getting weaker and weaker. Most of the time they were literally outside in the brush. So by the time I saw the baby covered with bug bites, totally dehydrated.
Going forward, it's clear that the process of sorting out who stays and who's sent back will take months, if not years. Some women and children who fled violence will stay as refugees, others as trafficking victims, and others will face deportation. Texas Senator John Cornyn spoke to CBN News about the process after visiting the Border Patrol station in McAllen.
This is an opportunity to treat these young children and other migrants in a humanitarian sort of way. The difficulty, I think, lies in where does the line get drawn, and where does a rule-based society intersect with our compassion?
Ultimately, Cornyn believes an immigration system with clearly enforced rules is the most humane. No one knows yet, of course, just how many of the immigrants in this current surge will be allowed to stay. So for now, Brian is staying safe in the shelter before he decides whether or not he'll cross. Wilmer, on the other hand, has decided to return.
I took a risk with my brother to help my mom. But since now I am here alone and I lost my brother, I want to go back.
And Lillian says she will continue to pray and trust God for a better life for her daughter.
The judge will decide whether we get to stay or we get deported. And well, God is great and mighty and only He knows. If it's for our welfare, great. And if I get sent back to my country, it's okay. It will be God's will.
Reporting on the border, Heather Sells, CBN News.
We'll be right back. Please stay with us. And finally this hour, Superbook has been a hit on the Cartoon Club channel in Thailand, and now CBN is using Superbook to reach children in local schools. More than 1,400 grade school students attended the first school event in Chiang Mai. One student said Superbook makes him want to know more about God and to pray. Gizmo also made an appearance dancing to the tune of the Salvation poem. All the children received a special notebook with Superbook information. They also listened to an encouraging message about Jesus, and 361 children prayed the Salvation prayer. Well, that is going to do it for CBN News today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. Tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Join us again right here next time. Make it a wonderful Wednesday, everybody.